Hello everyone, welcome back to a recap of Game 2 of the December Open played at the ASU Chess Club. So after defeating the 6-year-old in my previous video, I have the opportunity to play with the black pieces against my opponent here with the white pieces. We don't have to do any briefing, we could just jump right in. I mean, this game was played probably like 10 to 15 minutes after I just finished my other game. So there's not really a lot of time to like analyze or really just go over the game. You kind of just have to hop into the next one. So we'll go here. My opponent plays e4 here, and traditionally I play e5. I don't really jump into like Sicilian lines or that's the Karo Khan. I don't really jump into that. I haven't really studied enough, and I don't really feel comfortable enough going with that. So I usually just play e4, which I do. My opponent plays knight f3. And traditionally here, I usually just go knight c6 and jump into whatever variation my opponent wants to go into here. But here, I play an opening with black that I've actually never played before. Never played it leading up to this tournament, and actually have never played it afterwards. Why did I play it? I honestly don't even remember. I end up playing d6 here, which is the Philidor defense. I think as I'm trying to jog my memory, I think the reason why I played d6 here is because I think in a video and an article I must have watched, it just said d6 was very like stable, not very explosive. It's just very controlled, and there's just not a lot of moving parts. So I'm like, okay, I want a stable position. I don't really want to get into a big tactical battle with somebody if I don't really feel comfortable over the board. Um, I no, I should have just gone knight c6 and jumped into any of the other lines because that's what I've always played, and I don't know why I did that. So I guess that's why I did it. My opponent plays bishop c4 here. I go bishop g4, pinning the knight. And then a lot of the opening here is fairly standard. They're like reasonable moves. Like he moves his pawn attacking my bishop. I move it back. He castles, fairly standard. I go knight c6 here, which is fine. He goes c3, setting up this expansion with the d pawn here. That's the whole point of the move, c3. Here's a pretty decent inaccuracy or mistake, you could even call it. I go queen f6 here. It's just generally not a good. I've realized now. This is generally not the greatest move in the world. Your queen doesn't really do anything on this square. I guess it puts pressure on this knight, but this g pawn could always come in and interfere with that. And then the queen ends up being a target. And not only does it end up being a target, like eventually he'll go here and like come here, or he could come and attack it with the knight somehow. And like I said, not only does that happen, but it also takes away an easy square for the knight to develop to. Preferably, we like to have the knight here instead of the queen. So yeah, that was a pretty big mistake on my part. And then now he goes d4. Like I said, the whole point behind c3 was to go d4. And I castle here, which ends up being a pretty big mistake for a line that maybe he doesn't end up finding. I don't think he'll end up finding, but it's a mistake nonetheless. So the reason that it's a mistake is because you're able to play g4, right? And after g4, you're probably just like, oh, I just moved my bishop, and then now I'm fine. But the reason why you can't move your bishop to the square is because now he attacks you with his bishop, bishop g5 here, and after bishop g5, your queen is trapped. It has literally no available squares. It can't go anywhere, and you lose your queen, and that is bad. So I didn't see that. Obviously, he didn't see that. Great. We escaped one, but yeah, again, another reason why you don't want to have your queen out there, because again, it becomes a target and it could get trapped. So he goes d4. I castle. He goes bishop g5 immediately. So the reason why our queen doesn't get trapped in this variation is because you could just slide over to g6. But in the other position, when he comes g4, bishop g5, now you can't put your queen over there because your bishop is already occupying that square. So he messed up the mover here. So I get my queen out of the way, literally only move. And you can see here, I'm falling behind development. I still have two pieces that are in the back rank. He has a big space advantage. His bishop is really active. My bishop, I guess, is pinning his knight, but I mean, that's not the biggest deal in the world. My queen is getting hunted. He's already at +3 essentially. He's essentially winning. Um, and I completely missed this. And the another reason of going bishop g5 here is that he's pinning my queen to my rook. So when I move my queen like I did in the game, he takes my rook. So yeah, that's bad for me. I take back with the knight, just so I don't have to move my king and make it a little more weaker than it already is. He takes the pawn, I take the pawn. Fairly standard. He's trying to open up the board here, which makes sense since most of his pieces are out, and I still have 2 pieces on the back rank here. So he goes bishop b5 with the obvious threat of trying to come in with his queen, check me, and I have to come over, and he just starts trying to pick up a bunch of stuff and trying to mate me. So I block the diagonal he's trying to get to while simultaneously attacking his bishop. I go c6. He retreats back. That's a decent move. I think according to the engine, that's actually the best move. Okay, never mind. Don't listen to me. Well, the second best move is bishop d3, which is what I would have suggested, because that defends the pawn. But the engine likes that better. So when he goes back there, I could take the pawn in this variation, which is what I end up doing. He develops his knight while simultaneously attacking my queen. I move it out of the way. Oh wait, we had a decent spike. Why? Okay, no, it's just an inaccurate queen move. I develop my bishop, just try to get some pieces out. So apparently this loses to queen f5 check. So here after queen f5, if I block with my queen, he takes my bishop. If he goes here, so let me play this out. So if he goes queen f5 and I move my king, then he takes my bishop. That makes sense. If he blocks with the queen, I still take the bishop. I still go and take the bishop. And then if, yeah, so essentially that's what it is. It's just another fork. And I didn't see that, obviously. I went, excuse me. Where was I? Here, here, here. Yeah, and then I developed my bishop. That's right. Then he attacks my queen, going c4 here. I move it out of the way, and I also block the diagonal that his queen could have came to. And then around here, in this position, again, this was played in December of 2021, which is about 7 months ago from the time of the recording. And at this point, I just wasn't very comfortable playing these sort of like tough positions where I had to come up with ideas on my own. I think at this point I just didn't know what to do. I was playing very like defensive. I couldn't come up with any sort of attack, and I kind of just wanted to like mitigate my opponent's attack and then eventually like counter strike. But I wasn't really sure how to do that. And I'm just trying to come up with ideas at some point. He jumps in with knight e4. So the reason of this move is just wants to take my bishop. Generally, bishops are better than knights because bishops can control most squares and can see across the board, while knights could only attack within their little like L shape squared, and they're not long range attackers. So generally, bishops are better. So if you could trade your knight for a bishop, generally that's better. So he jumps in and tries to do that. I get my bishop out of the way. He activates his rook. Smart move. I activate my knight, trying to trade off his knight. My knight is bad because it was in the starting square, while his knight controls a lot of squares in the middle of the board, like these. And so if I could trade off my bad knight for his good knight, it's good for me. He jumps in, attacking my queen. I move it out of the way again, just playing really defensive because I screwed myself over in the opening playing something that I just never played before. So now I just got to play really defensive and try to like stop his attack. He infiltrates with queen f5. It's a little too late now because now in this variation, if I just move over, he can't take my bishop because my knight protects it. I do end up going queen b8. He jumps in with another check. That doesn't really do much. I just move my king again. Well, I could do one of two things. I can take it with my knight, which is actually what I should have done. I completely just missed free knight, and I just moved my king. Wow, that is poor of me. Wow. Yeah, I'm just not doing well, as you can see. And here my opponent has a plus 4.7 advantage, only if he takes the knight, right? If he plays anything else, like what he did here, which was knight takes e5, he relinquishes a lot of his advantage. Why? Because if he takes, my best move is taking with the queen, it seems. And then he has queen takes h5. Queen takes h5. And then, yeah, it removes the defender and he's able to pick up the bishop. Makes sense. But he doesn't do that. He plays queen d, knight d e5, right? Takes the pawn. I think what he sees here is that he essentially wants to come in and checkmate me. So if I give him a move, he doesn't mate me because my bishop protects. But he's threatening to essentially come in, right? So he goes there. I take the bishop here, and he's still winning only if he takes my bishop. But he doesn't do that. We actually have a pretty funny situation that ends up happening here, which is in this position, my opponent goes queen c8, right? Which is bad. But not only does he go queen c8, he goes queen c8 and says it's checkmate, right? So he thinks it's checkmate. And honestly, I'm looking at it at the board and I'm like, dang, like, I just got checkmated. Like, I'm screwed. And I'm like trying to find anything. Like, is it really mate? Is it really over? I'm just like, well, like, shoot, like, my knight can't come in, my queen can't come in. I'm back ranked. I'm screwed. And after like probably like 10 seconds, I realized my bishop could come back and block. And honestly, I thought I was mated, but he could come back and block, and I just didn't. I ended up seeing that at the end, and so we had to keep playing on. But he thought it was mate. It was actually pretty funny. So I come back and block. He just goes back to his square. So after not taking the bishop, I'm up 1 point of material here. My advantage is -8.5. Like, he is his position is just no longer better. Why is it 8.5? I'm gonna be honest, I don't know. Apparently it's 8.5 if I play queen e2. Oh, duh. So the reason why this position is -8.5 is because in this position I could just take a bishop, which is undefended, which is actually what I do end up playing in the game. Queen e2. I take a bishop. Now at this point I'm up 4 points material, and if I'm able to convert generally fairly easy, I can win this game. He attacks my queen, going rook e1, fairly easy move. I take a pawn, which is unguarded, fairly standard. He attacks my queen. Okay, so this is another mistake mid-level players make. So a fairly common tactical defense, I guess you could say, is if your queen is being attacked and you don't want to move it, you want to solve your problems by another way, is like you can attack the opposing's queen. So if I played something like g6, for example, well, that move loses, but just ignore that. If he could take my queen, I take his queen, and we essentially traded queens, right? And that's one way to solve your problems. But what I end up playing here is bishop g6. And while I still have an advantage of -3, -3.5 essentially, which is still winning, it's just bad because he could just take my bishop, right? So he takes the bishop, I take the queen, then he takes the queen. So in this like small little trade, he won a bishop and a queen, and I just won a queen. He essentially won a bishop. So it's just another tactical error on my part that I just didn't calculate. Again, these games are 55 minutes long. I definitely could take my time. Like, I think at this point, I probably still had around like 40-ish minutes still because I'm playing like fairly quickly. I just need to be able to see these things a little better. And that's what ends up happening in the game, right? And then I just try to develop my knight again, try to block up his open file. I go knight e6, rook d2. And when he plays rook d2, I see an sort of tactical idea that I could go here when he goes rook d2. I see that his rooks are on the same diagonal, but not only are they in the same diagonal, they're on the same dark square diagonal. And lucky enough for me, I have a dark square bishops. So if I could somehow get this bishop onto this diagonal, I could end up skewering his rooks, which is good for me. I could end up winning a rook for a bishop. So I try to execute that plan. I go bishop c7 with the obvious threat of going bishop a5. And I believe he completely misses it. He goes knight e2. Knight d4. He goes knight d4. Here I go bishop a5. Again, just completely skewering his rooks. And then, of course, I'm not afraid if he takes because I could always take back with the pawn, which is exactly what happens. Then he moves his rook. It's better to defend the rook because then at least you get a bishop for the rook instead of giving away the rook for free, which what ends up happening in this game. So at this point, I'm up 4 points of material. Again, the eval says I'm like -6. All I need to do is liquidate and convert this position. I attack his rook with my knight. He attacks my knight. I get my knight out of the way while also simultaneously defending his pawn. It's a little tricky because not only am I attacking his pawn, I'm also threatening a fork. So if he plays like a move like this, I just fork him. I go here and pick up the rook on the next move. That doesn't end up happening, obviously, because he moves his rook. I defend the pawn, and this game is essentially, the rest of this game is essentially just me converting. He's trying to lash out on his king side here and trying to make something happen, but he just doesn't have enough pieces to make anything happen if I defend decently enough. I try to activate my king, bring my king to the middle. This isn't the greatest move in the world because, I mean, I can just I protect the square 2 times. I guess he does have some funny tricks. So like if he goes here, here, and here, which is what happens in the game, if he can get rid of this pawn, say for example, So say for example we have a position like this, even though I'm still completely winning, he does have some decent chances if I completely screw this up by pushing his pawn and trying to get away. But with this pawn in the other position that I showed you, which is this pawn, if this pawn is still here, he can never really make it to the end of the board because once he reaches h6, I just take it. But yeah, he tries to do that and tries to take my pawn. I defend it because I know that pawn is fairly important. He pushes anyways. Again, like he's completely losing. He's at -10 now. The eval bar says, but he's just trying to make stuff happen. And again, at these ratings, you never know what could happen at the under 1,000 rating game. Anything can happen. I mean, so he's just playing along. He's pushing his pawn. I'm trying to bring my knight in the game. I think at this point, the best way to convert is probably just to push this pawn and make him think about making sure this pawn doesn't promote. But everything's winning. Again, he goes g6, and that's why having that pawn is important, because now I take it with my pawn. He gives me a check, and it's really important that a couple of moves ago I played king b8, because then I no longer have back rank problems. Let me just bring up this position where I played king b8. No, this was an older position, a little earlier, which is here. So here, as a waiting move, I play king b8 because now I know if I ever move my rook out of the way, say for example, if I ever move it here, I never have to worry about getting back rank because I could always go to c7, right? But if my king was here, right, and I moved here, then I lose, right? Because now my king has no squares. And we see that sort of trend happening here as well, right? Where a little move later, if my king was on a8, I would lose. I would get back ranked. But since the king's on b8, I don't have to worry about that anymore. So like I said, I go c7. And he's just trying to attack my pawns, trying to make stuff work. I attack his, he attacks my knight. Again, the sort of technique here in converting isn't exactly the cleanest, but at the same time, I just have so much more material that doesn't even matter. He takes the pawn, and I try to break here. He takes, I take, and in this position, my opponent decides to resign. He has essentially no hope. Of somehow, some way, I'm either gonna trade the rooks, and if we trade the rooks, he only has the king, right? And then I just go and promote, and then I win. Or eventually, since these two pawns are connected now, and he has no other pawns, they're connected past pawns. And eventually, these bad boys will start marching up the board, and I'm gonna promote, right? And I could end up protecting my king with my rook and my knight, so there's no checks or anything like that. So yeah, this was the end of game number 2 here. And I think after game 2, we were given a lunch, so I was able to analyze a bit and look at that, and just completely ashamed of my performance, right? Um, so yeah, I think that's gonna end up being the end of this video. What I did end up saying at the end of my last video is, if you have any sort of suggestions as to how to make this sort of more engaging or more entertaining, less boring, please let me know. Send me a DM, write it in the YouTube comments. Any of that works out. But the next game is going to be a real doozy, because in that game is complete bongers, complete dynamic position with a bunch of pieces flying everywhere. I think it'll be a good recap and a good thing for me to analyze, because I haven't looked at the game in a while. But yeah, thank you so much. Till then, see you then.